tell me about your heterarchical.
Okay, so I've been studying this for a few years, as you know, because I've pestered you a couple times. And the deeper that I dive into my book, and the gist is that patriarchy is not the issue is hierarchy. And until we're living in a heterarchical culture where there's no privilege, we're not going to have an even playing field. And my angle, of course, is language. So I can see from examining the language where hierarchy is inorganic and is not serving the highest interests, at a fundamental programming level. And at the same time, I understand that there is natural hierarchy, that just naturally exists. So I'm curious, like, how we're to create a heterarchical society while at the same time honoring natural hierarchy and what that balance will be and how that will look.
Yeah, that's such a good question. Well, should we get into that?
I'd love to.
I mean, my take on it is that you have, because I love threes and trinities. So you have heterarchy, which is horizontal, and hierarchy, which is vertical, and then you have synarchy, which is the correct and organic balance of the two working together. And a lot of people kind of misunderstand synarchy as a term, and I've noticed this, and I will do my best to remedy that. It's quite it's a mystical term in a way. Anyway, it takes quite a deep contemplation to penetrate it, because as you know, in Gene Keys, it's also the name for one of those cities, one of those higher states. So that it's something you kind of have to really wrap your whole being around, because it kind of transcends our dualistic understanding, because it's beyond dualism. So one way to understand it is it is that natural organic balancing. But what people often think is that they think synarchy is the same as heterarchy. So they think when I'm talking about synarchy, it means everyone's equal and everyone has this this sort of horizontal order where there's a balance, and there can be a great creativity in that as well. Like people have found in businesses or in organizations that heterarchical models work really well. They tend to work well, this is my understanding, they tend to work well in departments, but they don't tend to work well overall, because no control overall, or no, it's like it can be a bit of a soup. But in a department, like let's say a creative department, it's amazing. So you have no one in charge, and it's like the brain firing all this, with complete liberation, complete freedom. But the barrier, the boundary is kind of is outside the room, but it's not bounding the ideas. So in that sense, heterarchy is like it's what we need to kind of get to the next level, and in a way, because hierarchy is that hierarchy on its own, we all know what that does. That creates, it creates division, and it creates, rich and poor, and it creates deeper and deeper divisions in society, and it creates, all the divisions that we see today and worse, particularly from the past, and control, and those in control and those are not in control. And it creates territorial disputes and all of, we know the story, and that's what you're pointing your laser at. And yet I would argue that heterarchy isn't the answer on its own, because although it might be the next step, because and we need to get used to it. So we need to play with it. But I'll give you an example of a heterarchy that I've witnessed for over a decade, which is my local Steiner school, where my kids have gone to school. And it's very heterarchically organized, or it used to be. It's less so now. And so you have these groups, which were called mandate groups, which are groups of parents and teachers and contributors, stakeholders in the school in different ways, and they come together and deal with different problems in these different pools. And the whole thing was very creative, and everything took a lot longer but then it would if it was a hierarchy. If you could, yeah, and you sometimes felt yourself missing a hierarchy. You felt like, oh, I wish there was someone in charge just to say, let's get on with things. But actually, what you got from Heterarchy is relationships. So you got to know people, and you got to listen to people, and you got to empathize with people, and that's what's missing in hierarchy often. That you have these divisions. But then in the hierarchical model, there wasn't enough kind of the hierarchical ordering. There wasn't enough of the kind of natural pushing things forward, so it lacked efficiency. And so you saw energy ultimately leaking, and money leaking, and time, and people exhausted and overwhelmed over time, because the amount of time it took to work things out in that way. Although what you got was a wonderful sense of community, right? But in the end, it also kind of fell apart, that model, and it had, anyway, I won't go into what happened, but it was a really great teaching for me, witnessing it, and at times being part of it, and sort of feeling the loveliness of it, and then the frustration of it as well, and hearing it from others. And so synarchy is that balancing. It's where you kind of, in a way, you need to start. I feel you need to start with a heterarchical feeling and a model, and then you can gently bring in the hierarchy, or you don't even bring it in. You kind of tune into it because it's already there. Like you said, it's organic, and it's not about there is leadership in it, actually, but it's not leadership from the old way. It's not the leader doesn't kind of volunteer, or even they're usually located by the group, quite simply. And it's another thing that I often find is, nowadays, you probably know this, I'm sure you do, like there's all these there's in the business world and the corporate world, all the talk is about leadership, how to be a good leader, how to be a leader, leadership conference, leadership this, leadership empowerment, leadership mentoring, leadership, oh my God, it's like exhausting. And the irony is that not everyone can be a leader. Like everyone can kind of, well, not everyone's designed to be a leader, in a way. And there are different forms of leadership, for sure. There are different qualities and styles and modes. And yet, not if you don't have that capability, you really wouldn't want to be one. You'd feel the pressure of being in the wrong place. Like, I don't want these responsibilities. I don't want this, because it's not easy being a leader. Because you draw the projections, you have to have a certain kind of set of qualities. For sure, you have to have probably one of the most important, I would say, is listening, the ability to listen. So that would mark out a leader in a way, like in a hierarchy. Those who listen really well are actually those who you could trust. And so that's how a hierarchy kind of start to find itself within a heterarchy, and then that starts to crystallize into a synarchy. And then it's almost like you don't really have leaders, you just have people who take different layers of responsibility. So if you think of society, if you think of like a town or a city, and you go, well, there's the Lord Mayor, and then there's at the other end of the spectrum, there's the street sweeper, and then there's all the roles in between that help the city kind of function, and the shopkeepers, and all of that. And yet, the person in the right place who loves that place is the person, that is their role. And it doesn't have to be any more important than the person who has a greater sort of responsibility externally. But in one sense, they don't have a greater responsibility. That's just the way we see it. Like the street sweeper has an equal responsibility. Do you know what I mean? That's where the equality is. It's only when when we come in and we bring our fearful ideas of, well, control and the controlled and the leader and the follower, whereas in fact the ideal in a synarchy is that everyone is living their higher purpose. And that's why, you know, like I've been connecting recently with this lovely man, Daniel Levin, and he's written this book called The Mosaic. Do you know him?
No, is
No.
he's not the one who you've been doing the reincarnation series with?
No, that's Chris
Okay.
Beisch. He's also a lovely man. But no, Daniel Levin, he's written this book called The Mosaic, and in it it's a series of it's the journey of a child who meets a series of people in you know, and so each chapter is named after the person. And there's a mirror maker, there's a shoemaker, there's a street sweeper, there's a, you know, there's a wise one, there's a, you know, and all these people together form the mosaic of life. And they all have different sort of fractal views of reality, but because they're in the right place and they're living their higher purpose, then they're in the place where their genius resides. And so the street sweeper is every, you know, is doing something every bit as powerful as the Lord Mayor at the top, you know, at the top of the external hierarchy. So it's really about people being in the right places, which means you have to have people who can listen at all levels, and people who, you know, have transcended their egos and who've gone through a process of letting go, and they've realized that, you know, success is not about achievement. They've realized that, you know, success and failure are kind of a game that once you've exhausted it, you actually come to a place where you're actually not looking for success anymore. You're looking for fulfillment, and fulfillment is a very different thing from success. So that's the kind of the ideal of synarchy. So it's difficult unless you have a lot of people who are beginning to find their higher purpose in life, and then they find their center of the, it's an omnicentric model in that sense. They find their center in the synarchy, but there's no longer, the role is unimportant. It's like the ancients say, you know, if you look inside, you know, the wise ones will say, if you look inside two human beings, a king and a poor and a beggar, or a queen and a beggar, or whatever, you know, president and a beggar, if you look deep inside each of them, you see the same formlessness. It's just, you know, we are the formless. So when we realize the formless and we find that love inside us, the role, it doesn't matter. The role is just the role that wraps itself around you. So I'm wearing these clothes, you're wearing these clothes, and so it's an ideal synarchy, but it's so it's where we're moving towards. And I think what you've put your finger on, Danny, is that heterarchy is probably the first step to learn again, because it's where we learn the listening. So I don't know, how does that land with you?
Yeah, it definitely, a lot of the pieces are landing, and it sounds like, yeah, exactly as you're saying, that heterarchy is a place, it's a phase through which a natural, more loving, authentic, aligned, natural, organic hierarchy may possibly emerge, if that's what's right for the whole. Is that what I'm getting? But not necessarily like its own sustainable thing, since heterarchy remains such a, you know, like I've been studying holacracy and other sort of implementation, but yeah, when we go to the larger, you know, the larger overarching structures, it just doesn't seem super viable to all of a sudden get rid of hierarchy. But we're a natural hierarchy to emerge with people not being attached and people leading in service to the whole, not out of any egoic thing, then hierarchy doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. Is that the gist?
Exactly. And what you can have is you can have lots of clusters of heterarchies kind of connected to each other through, you know, hierarchical strands, if you like. So I don't know, one of the models that I want to experiment with, which I haven't yet, is, I don't know if you're aware of my Delta program. Have you done the Delta? You've done 3. Oh, good for you. Well, so you'll know, like, that's the beginning, because it's, but then the next stage of the delta, there's another stage of the delta, I don't know if you knew about that, where you have 3 deltas, 77 people, 3 sevens, go into a pool. So you have 20 people, 21 people, and they go into this new form together, and it consists of 3 5s at the corners. It's like it has a geometry to it, so it's a collective form. It's a collectivity. So it has 3 groups of 5 and one in the middle of 6, and it's the 3 ones on the corners, which I borrowed a term from human design called the pentas. They are kind of called the love penta, the action penta, and the mind penta. And so, the wisdom penta. So you have love, wisdom, and action. And then in the middle is the hive. It's like the mind, the hive mind. And there's 6 people, and they're in 3 pairs, and each pair communicates with one of the pentas. So it's like this tetrahedral shape. And the 6 are all connected, and they discuss things together. And the information passes from the penta, who make their decisions, who come up to the hive, and then the hive feed it back out to the 3. So that's the theory, right? And then this group of people. So what's going to happen when we trial it is this group of 21 people who've already done the deltas, so they already kind of understand how collective mind works to a degree. They're given a challenge, and their challenge is you 21 people have to enact a philanthropic deed in the world, right? You have to do it, right? You've got as long as you need. You can do it. You have to organize it yourself. You have to self-organize. You have to figure it out. These are your roles. So these 3 thrusters of the pentas, this group, its job is to make sure that it stays on track through love. So you don't lose the empathy, you don't lose the reason, the heart reason why you're here. And then the wisdom one is like tracking, okay, we need to be really clear about this. Like, it's great to be loving and all that, but we're like focused on like, well, let's have some clarity. Let's have some clear plans of how we go about this. And then the action one, obviously their role is to make sure that things happen. So, but between the 3 of them, they're kind of networked together as a whole. So I'm sharing this because it's an example of, theoretically anyway, because we haven't trialed it yet, how a collectivity could operate through heterarchies, network together. But you see, it's almost like that there is a hierarchy. It's very subtle, but it's not a normal hierarchy. There's almost a hierarchy of communication. But everyone's even there because it needs to listen to itself. Every person needs to be listening to the whole, and that's like that's how an advanced civilization might operate.
And where is the hierarchy of communication in this structure?
Well, because the hive in the middle, those 6 people, their responsibility is to filter and interpret what each penta says, and then share that back with the group. So they have a specific responsibility to get it clear, and they have to check, so they're in a way the kind of the brain. So it's a subtle form of hierarchy, but it's not an up down. It's just there's a way in which the communication has to happen. It's like passing the talking stick in a circle. That's the rule. Here are the rules of communication. So that's all I mean by there's a structure formed.
It feels like that. For that to succeed, that trust is so key. Like, everyone in the penta has to really trust those 6 beings in the middle to be able to accurately translate what they're wanting. Is trust building part of
totally? Yes. And so the pair here that are communicating with the love penta, for example, they have to check with them, is this exactly what you want us to say to the whole? This is our interpretation, and would you like? Are you okay with that? So they have to kind of check that, and then they get the okay, hopefully, and so you have a kind of consensus that hopefully builds. Okay. But there may have to be also kind of checks and balances built in, where each penta has to kind of, because there might be disagreements or dissonances. like, and so you've got to keep the energy moving. So we don't really know how it will work with current human beings,
Right.
but one could imagine how in the future, with a more advanced awareness, that might be how our civilization is designed to operate. And so in a way, when you look at things like that, it's an out of the box way of thinking. You almost kind of eliminate heterarchy and hierarchy. Usually that's a glimpse of synarchy, because it's not dealing with either, it's dealing with both, but because it's all built into the system itself. But I kind of feel like, I don't know, in the glimpses I've had of collective intelligence, that's how I see it working, something like that, where decisions kind of get made, through an alchemical process that takes place in small groups. And those groups have to get to know each other really well so that they can totally trust what's going on in the group, and then they can feed that. And then they have to, yes, you're right, trust the hive, and then they communicate out, and they're hearing feedback coming from the other ones, that's feedback to their feedback. And you're getting kind of at different levels feedback. So they then process those two other layers of feedback. And the hive people, they don't add their own interpretation.
Ooh, that takes a real clean system.
Totally. It does. And that's their journey.
Yeah, totally.
Like, because they have to meet as a six and in pairs. And also in that system, you get, the idea is that you land in your place and you don't move. You stay in that place. And so you stay in that place until the philanthropy is done. So your job is that job, it's that role, and you've landed there for a reason, with those people for a reason, in order that you can, find this higher harmony. So it's an example of how it might work.
Yeah, I'm learning, the deeper I go into this study, that heterarchy is a big leap into the unknown, since there is no fixed structure. And I just started a group here, a solution salon, and we're aiming for a heterarchical structure. And we're not going with the idea that there's no leader, it's that wisdom is the leader. And our job is to tune in, and we don't know who it's going to want to speak through at any given moment. But the big piece that I'm noticing now is that the most awakened, expansive, loving leaders or potential leaders want nothing to do with that role or responsibility. That's what I'm finding in my world, is the people who seem like would be the best just want nothing to do with it.
I think that's what marks them out as good for the role.
Right.
I mean, one of the I don't know if were you at any of my things my events where we organize people into the line numbers. Did you ever?
Yeah.
Were you there? Were you
on Cortez, 7 Sacred Symbols?
Did we do that there?
Yeah, we were both one lines.
Oh, cool. So that was a good example, again, of how a synarchy kind of builds itself through humans, playing different structural roles in the overall reality. Because you remember, the first lines all start in the middle, and we ask them to stand alone, in case anyone, because you know what I mean, but people who are listening to this might not know. So a group of people, and you get all the first line people to go into the middle and stand alone, and everyone else is around the outside. And each group has to feel what's it like to be that first line, to be that alone, to be that entrepreneur, that sort of anchor alone. And there are other ones next to you, but there's a space between you, but there's a relationship within the space, but there's still you're alone.
Yeah.
And then the second lines come in, and the second lines form bonds. They form one-to-one bonds. So they find a first line and they bond with them, in chemistry, and they connect them. And then there's a relationship that builds, and there's something magical when that happens, because, you suddenly have a kind of pregnant vessel. And there might be also a few ones that don't get bonded with because there aren't enough, or maybe there are too many, you know, so there's a, you know, and that's also life. Sometimes there's some floaters, you know, waiting to bond, or there's some first lines waiting to be discovered in their basements, you know, and that's how it is. There's always like that kind of that choreography at work of waiting for the right moment. But then the third lines come in, and their role is to, what were they? They were just to form little groupings of 5 or less, right? So they can like cluster together. You got to have, I think it's 5. I think what we said, it depends how many people you have, but it's small clusters anyway, families in a way. So they create families. So you've got these little units of 5 or less, these pentas, these groups, who are just like floating. But the moment the 3s come in, there's a real bubbling warmth that enters the room there, because it's not just the intensity of a pair or a relationship or a partnership, you know, which could be the foundation, for example, of a business, or it could be the foundation for a marriage, or it can be the foundation for a family, or anything. But then when you have the third one, you have a little family, you have a child, you have a kind of third witnessing energy. So, or more, you might have, you know, you have different, you know, in a 5, there's different pairs, there's 3s, there's 4, there's a 4, there's a, you know, there's 1 left out. If there's a 4, there's all these dynamics. And so there's this kind of richness and energy and bubbling energy. So, and laughter often, and it can be pain as well. And because one leaves or it splits up and then it forms another one. And those are the little family units. And then when the 4th lines come in, their job is to make sure that there's not a single person disconnected. So they connect up all the units. You know, they're the networkers, and they connect together all those units so that there's a big chain. They're the links of culture. So those 4th lines, that's how they bind, you know, they bind families, groups. They kind of bind together one cluster, one silo with another silo, and they kind of bridge whole networks. And that's an incredible role, because then you have, when the 4th line comes in, you have we for the first time. You know, you have we. If you look at the pronouns, they follow this. Those as I is the first line, you singular, that's the relationship. He, she, or it, that's when you're looking at another cluster over there, going, look at that, look at he, and look at that one, look at that, she, look at that, you know, look at that. And then 4 is when it's a we. Suddenly there's no one left out. And then when you have 5, the leaders, the kind of traditional, they're not traditional, but the 5 is the leader, and they come in and they all stand around the circle like pillars, but they're facing outward. That was the way we did it. So they face outward. And I don't know if you remember how that felt, Danny. It was quite powerful.
I don't remember that specific. I don't remember the
okay.
5-line exercise, but I mean, I remember the whole thing was so powerful.
It's quite powerful because you, for the first time, you know, the fifth lines, they are kind of, they're holding the responsibility of the whole. They're shouldering it, you know, and that, you know, and that's why they're looking outwards, because they're kind of, they've got your back. You've got their back. You know, they're your spokesperson. And you can feel that the kind of the responsibility of that, and the courage of that, and the humility of that, and also the protection actually of that. It feels protective. You feel, you know, you feel like, wow, the power of having someone who you know you can trust, who, you know, and you realize for the first time what those people actually, you know, how that's a rarer role. You know, and not everyone can do that. You know, it's a certain predisposition, soul energy, or a genetic energy, or whatever you want to do, whatever you want to look at it.
Does that coincide with the role of the 5-line to kind of track transpersonally?
Yeah.
Everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And ultimately, actually, it's the 5th line is the most generous in that way. It's like, it's the most magnanimous. It's like, it's in some respect, it's the humblest, because it takes on it says, okay, I will take on the projections for all of you. You know, I'll take them. and you know, whatever that does, you know, if they take them well, then it, you know, it's their generosity that just transforms them. And you of course 1, 2, 3 and 4th lines are then in full support of that. So the 5th line gets all the support of those it's representing, you know, and out of this structure has kind of formed our hierarchies in you know, social hierarchies throughout history. But it, of course, it's all about the frequency of the individuals, you know, because that's a natural, I haven't got to the 6th line yet, but that's a natural way in which humanity is designed to operate, you know. And you can see the whole history of humanity in that, from the cave dwellers, the Neolithic humans, you know, the isolated little groups, the first partnerships, all of that, you know, social hierarchies building, heterarchies building, and then you can see like the tyrants and the leaders and the pashas and the kings and the emperors and the warriors and the, you know, you can see them all. You can see the whole thing kind of in its kind of grisly glory and how it's let. But so underneath hierarchy is actually something pure, but it's about the energy inside the individuals. And how you know, we once we make it to the next tier of consciousness, we'll restore natural synarchy, you know. And the 6th line is kind of key, because in the current hierarchical model of the planet, the 6 lines have been left out, you know, because you know, that's the nature of the 6th line. It always feels left out in a hierarchy that isn't fully functioning in a healthy way. There are no healthy 6 lines, and so the 6 lines don't feel like they have a role in that. And their role is really, you know, their deepest role is philanthropy, is to see, and vision is to see on behalf of the whole, is to see even beyond the leaders. It's to be able to kind of see, well, you know, how are the leaders doing as well. But it's to be able to be in each one of the other parts, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, and to have, in a way, the 6th line has to move through all those roles in their life to understand them all. And so it's only when they come really later in their life, that's why they say in your 50s, Chiron return, that the 6th line kind of develops its wisdom, you know, and it's and then it can share that wisdom. But its wisdom is a living wisdom rather than the kind of, you know, knowledge wisdom. Right. It brings its, you know, so the 6 lines, often if there's a balcony, we put them up on the balcony and they can look down, and then we invite them to come down, and they're always a little bit nervous about coming and joining in. And you can be anywhere in the group. You can be a 5, you can be a 4, you can experiment with any of them, because you're the only one that knows you're none of them. So you're the one that is here to kind of remind us all of what synarchy is, and how far it can take us into the future, and fulfill our dreams, and our highest goals and stuff. So, but like, if you look at current day business, for example, you don't see a lot of, it's beginning actually with the sustainable movement, you know, with people that are concerned finally about the environment, with people like you who are talking about heterarchy, people who are talking about EQ and listening, and you know, these are all the kind of teachings of the 6th line coming in, going like, it's not just our generation, it's about future generations, it's about layers, it's the whole of humanity, you know. It's not about our little lifetime, it's about it's like the people that built those cathedrals, you know, that was beyond a lifetime, that work. And that's a metaphor, you know, because I'm not wanting to glamorize what probably possibly happened in those times, but it's, you know, that's how it is. It's like we're building this new world, but we have to kind of think beyond our generation, and it takes a 6th line thinking process to do that. And when I say all this, by the way, it doesn't really matter which, you know, because you might go, well, which line, you know, it's not about what you are, it's just about, you know, if you happen to know gene keys, you can look at that and you can probably extrapolate some value from that for yourself. But actually, it's more important just to see that's how the whole of life works. So we have all of those lines in our lives, you know. We're all looking for relationships and love. We have to deal with family. you know, or business, you know, small groups, and we have to deal with community. That's the fourth line, and we have to deal with leaders. That's the fifth line, or tyrants. And the sixth line is the one that's just coming in. It's from the future. It's like it's an awareness that's kind of coming alive online in us, and it's the one that understands synarchy. So a business now, sorry, I'm going on, but a business now that kind of asks the fundamental question of what is our true higher purpose, that, or, you know, or a country or an organization, anything that asks that, how can we be of the greatest service to the whole? That's the question of the sixth line. If it lives that line, if a country were to have that courage to ask that question and then live it, that country would flower, you know, in an amazing way. So yeah, that'd be a good thing to get into governments.
So such a good thing. I'm curious about, you mentioned the school that you were involved in and how it wasn't necessarily efficient and things were slower. And I'm wondering how much our distorted relationship to time interferes with the natural process of undoing the hierarchical distortions that really need to be undone. Did that school ultimately just fall apart?
No, it mutated. Some of them did, you know, some of them do. Hierarchy, you know, heterarchy is an experiment. So wherever you see it in society, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It has to mutate, it has to change in order to kind of, so, you know, again, it depends on, you know, it can't really survive indefinitely unless it's part of another, like I said, the example of a department. And then it could survive indefinitely almost, because it's protected in a hierarchical model. And as long as that hierarchical model is fueling it and those people are being paid, it can stay, you know. Right. But then the question is, how is the hierarchical model paying for it? You know, right. So it's not ideal, but it's just an example of they can live, but until it gets translated to the whole, that fragrance of heterarchy, then the whole can't really, you know, we all have to, what I'm saying is we all have to awaken together. You know, that's what the Bodhisattva vow is all about. Like, until everyone is awake, we can't all be awake. You know, there can't be the full awakening unless everyone's awake. I think that, you know, the Buddha, you know, had that realization at some level. Like, absolute awakening requires everyone to be awake. Otherwise, it's relative awakening. You know, it's individual awakening, which, you know, you've merged with the formless. Yes, wonderful. And that the rest of us are still here. So that was what the whole Bodhisattva vow is. I'm going to give up my nirvana, and I'm going to stay here until the very end, until the very last person gets it. You know, which is such a beautiful concept. You know, it's very, very, it's the ultimate sixth line concept, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I wonder if, because I wonder how much, now I asked this, but I'm going to ask it again, of like, I do feel like the heterarchical phase is going to require a slowing down and a shift in our devotion to efficiency. And I feel like it's going to require different timing because it is experimental and because it is elevating or prioritizing human relationship over bottom line and profits and whatnot. And my other piece is that I'm wondering, are we going to ultimately evolve out of natural heterarchy, like, or natural hierarchy, like social, when you walk into a room and you can feel who top dog is and who isn't, and will we ultimately evolve out of that?
I think it will take, I think you're right. It requires a slowing down, because listening requires slowing down. And so it does require a shift in principles where we even see efficiency as something different. You know, timing of yeah, it's like we do have to find a different kind of way of being with each other. And it's like if you really get to the basis of what matters to people in life, particularly for people who are dying, it's always relationships and love, and those are the things that have meant the most. And so when people really get that, they realize, God, none of this stuff really matters, but this matters. The thing that really matters is spending time with people you love, or creatures you love, or with each other. Love is the thing that matters, and it kind of requires that we do change. You're right, just change our kind of way of operating. And sacrifice efficiency to a degree.
Yeah, and I also feel like it's just yes, sacrifice, but also maybe just shifting the definition. That's always my preference. Instead of saying something's like wrong, it's just like, let's shift it towards harmony. Because I see my impatience in my heterarchical group of like, we're not getting things done, and then realizing it's about harmony and knowing one another and trusting and being able to pass the talking stick and know when to listen. It's just my sense. I don't know. But as I, for me, it's all about the language. And the deeper I study this, the more I've come to understand natural hierarchy and how it is there. It really exists. But as I also see, language creates everything. It is the tool that creates our reality. So as we root unnatural hierarchy out of our languaging, and we start speaking a truly inclusive and equal, loving language, then I don't see how the reality that we program would continue to configure as hierarchy when that's rooted out of the language. And then that's where my mind just is like, well, I can't even conceptualize what that would be and how we would choose to self-organize without that tool programming us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
But then when I go to as above, so below, are there dimensions that are operating without hierarchy at all?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they transcended and included it. You see what I mean? So it's, but by transcending and included it, they've also vaporized it in some way. It's kind of, it's no longer a thing. It's just part of harmony. It's part of the beautiful harmony. And that's the thing about harmony. Like once you hear harmony between, let's say, a group of musical instruments, you cease to hear the individual instruments. You just hear the harmony, and you not just hear it, but it transports you to another realm. But I think the other process, you're right, is about language. Is the language of energy is crucial. Like understanding the configurations of energy and how it is transmuted by a group is really important. I did this thing a while ago of the 6 phases of that. Do you remember that one? It begins with dissonance. So that was, again, 6 lines for, so the first line is dissonance. So in any group, in your group, like really listen, first of all, like where is there a dissonance? And it's not coming from a specific person, although it might come through one person's language, and it might dissonance. You might feel a dissonance in the group, but it's actually the groups. If the group is there for the purpose of transformation, it no longer distinguishes, but that in terms of blame, it just goes, that person's tuning into the dissonance that's actually already here, and they're representing it in some way. So let's listen to them and let's feel it with them. And because you all feel it, the moment you hear dissonance, you're like, oh, how could you say it that way? Or I don't agree with the way you phrased that, or like, that's really uncomfortable, or it's just in their tone, or it's anger, or it's something that kind of forms an energy in you that's uncomfortable. And in a group, everyone feels it. And so the key is not to sort of get hooked on the person that's brought it, but to listen to them and to realize it's part of the group, as part of the collective. And then when you let it in, the second phase is feedback. And the feedback is really important, because the feedback is just that is like, oh, that hurts. It's like feedback can be like a reaction. It can be like, oh, I don't know, that just hurts when I hear you say that, or that, it's just, it needs to hear, it can be anger. It just has to come out. It's like, it has to come out in its purity, and hopefully it'll come out without projection, but it still needs to come out. So it could come out as crying or anger, or kind of a shout, or some, that's feedback. It's like comes out without any anything in the way. And that's
about
yeah.
the first one before we move too
Yeah,
far away, because
sure.
I know this is something that comes up in the conversation about heterarchy, is it gets confused with like socialism or communism. So where does personal responsibility come in terms of seeing this person as speaking the dissonance for the group itself?
Yeah, that has to be, that is a really good point. That has to be, everyone in the room has to agree to that. So you need to have some basic principles, in any group. So you got to start with those principles, those agreements. Okay. Like this is, basic agreements that we will behave in this way. We will own our own things. And we, but for those who are listening, we will also own how it makes us feel when someone else shares something uncomfortable, and we'll own our own projections, and as best we can, but sometimes someone might need to share their projection because it just part of the feedback, it comes out, and they may not see that for a while, because it's still quite early in the process. So the feedback is like, it just has to come out into the room, so you let people, but then they're still, we're still owning as best we can what's going on inside us. And yet we also have to kind of allow a bit of, if we're too kind of goody-goody, it's like we're too, if we're too controlled, then the energy of the feedback can't kind of come out. So there has to be a balance there, like share it, let it come out, but also maintain that kind of self-responsibility as much as you can. But then everyone has to also do their best to allow things to come up, emotions especially.
So it feels like it requires us, for the participants to be operating at a certain level. I don't know if it's necessarily a second tier, but going back to the Bodhisattva conversation, that like it's going to take a certain degree of collective expansion to be able to operate in, and sustain a heterarchy.
I think so, yeah. Although, often in a group, that feeling like there's a group of people that kind of resonate, and then there's one or two who kind of seem like they are kind of on another plane, or sort of stuck. And it's like I always remember Trungpa saying, bring that woman back. When they took the, he went away, and there's this one woman in his organization that just caused chaos. And when he was gone away on retreat, they kicked her out. And then he came back however many months later, and he said, where is she? She's the linchpin of the whole community. Bring her back. And finally they were all like at peace.
But it took Trungpa's level of consciousness to be able to recognize that, to rebalance the whole group.
Yeah, so those people are not, they're kind of, they're holding something important. They're holding a part of the trauma of the whole, and they also really need, they might need more patience. That they're there for a reason. If they've arrived and they're there. It's like in the Delta experiment. If you get someone in your group who's really traumatized, out of all the hundreds of people who've landed in these deltas, this person's landed in your 7 people, right? And you've got to deal with them for 7 weeks, and you've got to, listen to that and hold that. But it's the perfection of the synchronicity that's landed them with you. So, because each of those other 6 people or 5 people or 6 people who are dealing with that, or five of you who are dealing with that other, well, with 6 of you who are dealing with that person and their energy and that whatever it is, it's exactly what you need. It's the dissonance, you know, like you've got seven strands and a harp, and one of them's completely out of tune, and it affects all the others. And so you have to kind of tune all of them to cut, you know, it's not only about that one twisting and getting it right. They all have to tune a bit more to kind of bring that balance back. So everyone has to stretch.
Yeah.
But what an amazing opportunity. And of course, yes, sometimes that person or that energy lands there and then it jumps out, you know, and that's also part of the process. It can't so if you maintain that state of forgiveness, patience, harmony, higher vision, and you maintain that around that person, they either heal or leave, you know, and that's like, you have to, you know, in the Delta, for example, you get 7 weeks to see, you know, and by the end of those 7 weeks, something's happened or they've gone.
Right.
You know, probably they've gone through a healing, and everyone's gone through a healing. I don't know if you experience that at all, but it's because it's different each group. So anyway, well, I don't know where we were, but
I had interrupted you after you had done the second line.
yes, okay, the feedback, and then, well, we can just carry on chatting about it. But then the third line is alchemy, and they don't sort of, you know, it's all part of, it's all a flow, you know. So as soon as you feel the dissonance, the alchemy begins, you know, and but it's just our way of breaking it down so we can understand the process. And the alchemy is the third line, and the alchemy is this process when a group is in mid-transformation. And it's kind of scary, and it's at times, or it can be funny, I guess. It can be very confusing, because you don't really know where you're going. You don't know whether this is right. You'll probably, you know, it's the time you're likely to doubt or question. You know, why am I here? Is this working? What's, you know, all those things come up because it's the third line process. You don't know. You're in the crucible, and it's a really important process to honor. You know, this is in any transformational process. I'm describing something universal. So this can happen in a conversation with someone. This can happen, you know, within a relationship over years. You can move into an alchemical phase with someone in your, I mean, I've been through them with my wife, you know, where you go into, you know, there's dissonance that comes up, you know, and then there's events that take place, and then there's feedback, and there's discomfort, and then there's the alchemy, and you're like, are we gonna make it through this? And no one knows, and then the phase 4 is sharing, you know, because I'll just roll it out. And sharing is when you kind of begin to lift free of the alchemy phase, and some part of you starts to kind of be able to share. It's different from feedback, which is just the raw, like feedback of a, you know, if you think of a speaker, you know, when it goes like, that's feedback, can be like that. It's kind of like, oh, it just comes out. Whereas sharing is coming from the soul. It's had to go through alchemy, and then the sharing comes out, and the sharing can be tears, or it can be, you know, it is a truly authentic expression of something deep in the group soul, something deep in humanity's soul, you know, some deep wound or some deep yearning or something that everyone relates to. But when it comes, when that level of sharing comes, it sort of creates silence around. It's like, wow. Or sometimes, like when someone shares from deep within their soul, deep their vulnerability, and everyone's like, wow, you know, this is the result of the alchemy. And then it kind of often has, you know, a knock-on effect. Someone else shares, and then someone else shares, and there's this kind of presence that starts to return. And then line 5 is distillation, where it's the end. It's kind of the final, it's the conclusion, where everyone's, so sometimes it comes through one person who just distills everything, who just said, who's in their sharing, they just manage to kind of bring everything, and they sort of speak the essence, and everyone gets it. But often it's come from one person, sometimes the most least likely person, the one that's been quiet, or the one that's, you don't expect. And they, how that often happens in a group, the one that's quiet for a long time then suddenly speaks later in the process, and they like come out with some incredible wisdom. You're like, wow. And everyone's like, that's it. And then the process is kind of done. And then the sixth line is gratitude. And that's what everyone's feeling. Everyone feels it. And that's consensus, So that's the process that has to take place in every heterarchical unit. It has to go through that. Sometimes it'd be an hour, sometimes it'd be a week, sometimes it might be longer. And you have to be committed, and you have to have the agreement so that you stay committed. And then, eventually you get to that gratitude, and the gratitude can include differences, so you can actually agree to have differences, and it's like, but you feel good about it. You're like, well, it's like you and I talking about whatever it was, COVID, like we agree to have different views, and because we're from different realities and different cultures and different conditioning around us, and we've kind of sifted it for ourselves, and we've looked at all the information, and then we take our view, and we're like, well, this is this is where I'm at now. It might change, but then you're kind of, there can be a deep love and a respect, for someone else's positionality, and that's where you realize, oh, it doesn't really matter actually. It really doesn't matter. It's like we all know, it doesn't really matter what color you are, or where you're from, or what your background is. Actually, at the deepest level, we are kind of part of the harmony. So yeah, hopefully that's a helpful way of also looking at the process underlying heterarchy as we move towards synarchy.
That's super helpful. I'm excited to transcribe this, and I need to see it. I want to see a chart.
Yeah.
Given how, expansive the Gene Keys community is, and we're spread out all over the world in your own travels, do you see any geographical pockets that are moving us ahead as a humanity in this conference? Are there countries or regions that are starting to implement these things?
I think there are groups of people working with it. I mean, one of the things that some of the earliest groups I came across were in Eastern Europe, funnily enough, and Romania was a good example. And I love the Romanians, and I went there the first time, and I started to share all this stuff. And
what do you love about the Romanians?
I love their passion. I love their commitment, and I'll explain why I love them. Because after I left the first time, and I left them with the Gene Keys, and they were all kind of excited, and there was a huge group of people, and there, and mostly brought through my friend Andrew Fretwell, who's a wonderful man, who kind of introduced me into that community, and anyway, so after we left, there were all these they all entered a competition with each other, setting themselves up as Gene Keys this and Gene Keys that, and then we had all this feedback. Oh, this person's doing this, and this group are doing that, and it's like, oh my God, what are they on? and we kept hearing this, and then I don't know, like after a few years of working continuously with the Gene Keys, and a lot of Romanians continue to come and learn and go deeper. I remember saying to a friend, like, how is it now in Romania? And she said, it's really good. Everyone is really kind of working together. I said, wow, that's so different from how it was in the beginning. And she said, yeah, they've really kind of started to get, not everyone, but they've started to understand the basis of this, and they've started to work together and collaborate. and that of course collaboration is one of the key words for, like, you know, being able to create these heterarchies. And yeah, so I've loved witnessing that from afar. I'm not saying it's perfect or they're perfect, but I think that their passion carried them through it. And the others are the Bulgarians, who are very different style of people, more intense in a way. And
that's saying a lot.
yeah. Well, there's this kind of passion, wear your emotion on your sleeve, of the Romanians, and then the Bulgarians were more like held, but, you know, more cautious, but underneath this incredible deep dark depth, you know, I mean dark in a good way. And so they took it very seriously, the ones I know, and they've had their share of problems as well, of course, we all do, but they kind of you know, they really modeled Synarchy from the beginning as best they could. And maybe it was also partly because they had this incredible teacher, Bain Saduno, who actually coined, you know, who spoke of Synarchy, and I kind of got the term inspired from him. So I'm just checking because my I don't know about the rest of the world. Those are just a couple of examples.
I'm curious to know how they were modeling Synarchy. I don't want to keep you too long, but I'm just curious when you say they were already modeling Synarchy.
Well, I think they, you know, well, Heterarchy for sure. You know, they started to kind of consider, how can we do this in a you know, in a way that really has justice and fairness, and include everyone, and so that everyone is empowered, and that we listen to everyone. And they kind of they took that as their first, you know, the people that in Bulgaria, you know, they began with those principles, and maintained them as best they could. And I think that, you know, it's been quite successful because they created a culture of that in the beginning, without it being kind of an imposition or a set of rules. Yeah, which is always a delicate balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it also often depends on the individuals. You know, if the individuals have really pure hearts and they kind of have clear minds and a real commitment to the core principles of how can I be of the greatest service to the whole, if that's their fundamental life view, then it can be powerful.
Yeah.
Same for anyone anywhere. And I'd love to hear more examples. I'm probably not plugged in enough.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know from our community watching this, what examples they have. And I'm also interested that it's coming out of Eastern Europe, that I guess saw the dark side of hierarchy, you know, in a different way than we have here in the West. Totally.
Yeah, especially those two countries, you know, and Hungary was another one, but and Czechia as well, you know, where there's a lot of people very interested in these teachings. And, you know, Hungary, for example, there's still that dark energy is still very much part of their government. But, you know, yeah, you're right. In Romania, you know, it was only in the 80s that the regime kind of fell apart. And Bulgaria also, you know, fairly recent. So the memory is very much in the people. It's even in the younger people, actually, still not very young, but, you know, it's still carried. So yeah, I think you're right. I think you're onto something there. I had that sense when I was there as well.
It's giving me a more well-rounded appreciation for the increasing tyranny and authoritarianism that we're experiencing here. Like maybe it's, you know, it's kind of like pulling back the slingshot to bounce us into a place where we're ready and resourced to really enact heterarchy.
Yeah. So anywhere that anyone's experimenting with these ideas, it's, you know, it's absolutely, you know, like you are, it takes courage, it takes a spirit of adventure, it takes like that passion that I spoke of the Romanians, and that intense focus, you know, of the Bulgarians, and to really be able to kind of hold a group of whatever size through that process I just described until you get to gratitude. But wouldn't it be amazing if our nations were able to do that? If our yeah, well, they will one day. Yeah, that they were able to move through those dissonances, and they had processes and an understanding, a spiritual understanding that enabled them to stay and realize that it wasn't about just words and working things out through strategies. It was the energy in the room, and it was about listening. Listening is the key,
Yeah, such a more yin shift.
Yeah, and that's why as you said, it's going to take time. It requires patience, and
yeah, I'd be curious to see what had happened with the schools had it maybe some more patience or some more time. I don't know the elements in play, but I'm starting to understand that our misunderstanding of time might be getting in the way of evolving us into some of these structures.
Well, often, the problem is that time is money, isn't it? And so in our modern world, it's in a business, it appears that way, or in a school, for example, that if it's set up in that way, unless it has a lot of spare resources or it's set up in a different way, that can become a big pressure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's just a reality for, if you were to start with something from the beginning, and you start with, this is what I'm going to be doing with the Pearl teachings later this year, is sharing, simplicity. Like if you start with simplicity and you maintain simplicity the whole way through, and service, if the business is fundamentally here to be of service, and you maintain the simplicity at every level as it expands, and it's self-sustaining, then you have a model that kind of doesn't get ahead of itself. So that time pressure doesn't have to be there, because almost every business, if it starts to succeed, a time pressure starts to come in.
Yeah, you're right. It would need to be woven in from the beginning, a different aim, different priorities to allow more time and patience.
Yeah, and space to listen. Really, you've got to create those times. Like, and everything's busy. Like I know it with my business with Gene Keys is like, you've got to create time to meet so that you can question what you're doing and go, well, are we on the track? What do we need? If something's becoming complicated, if someone's becoming overwhelmed, then we need to sort of stop and pause for a bit and let the system catch up and us understand better, what do we need to change here? Because if we carry on like this, it's just going to make it worse, because and that's what happens often in businesses. You're feeding the beast, and then it just and it's a sort of addiction as well that we fall into, because it keeps us.
It's so much more compassionate to defer to the well-being of the players. Like if we're overwhelmed and feeling rushed, then let's pull back, versus, well, let's work harder and do more.
Totally. Yeah. To try and get to the holiday,
Right. So crazy.
I know, you've got to build the Holiday Inn. Like that's what the Holiday Inn, excuse my you build the holiday
hotel franchise.
The holy day, every day has to be kind of a holy day. That's my aim for Gene Keys as a business, so that everyone, is enjoying their role. And if people aren't enjoying their role, then there's something wrong somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's wrong, but there's a dissonance that needs to be listened to. So you need to hear the feedback, even if it's uncomfortable, and then you need to go through the alchemy of whatever that involves. We're going to have to make some changes, probably. Might have to let go of some things. So, might have to pivot in our goals. Might have to cancel something that we had planned. Might have to, a lot of difficult decisions we have to make to bring it back to like breathing, and this is where we started, let's carry on. So it's a constant process of simplification. Life is.
That's so helpful. I mean, I know you guys are doing so many things and I don't want to add anything, but I feel like as you're tweaking the internal structure, some sort of blog or reflective process for other people creating these structures for anyone who's creating and sustaining a heterarchical structure, that would be helpful for everyone since we're all making it up as we go along, you know? Like I just learned so much from what you just said.
Yeah. It's a really good idea, actually. I will I'll take that and contemplate that, Danny. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it'd be really nice. I mean, one of the things that we haven't actually met yet, but we're going to have a council where lots of different representatives come together to hear what's going on in the business, and everyone reports in, you know, a coherence council. But it occurs to me that it might be quite good to have someone from outside the business also participate, so that they could share any insights out to, you know, anyone who's interested of what we're learning.
Yeah, because I've seen, I mean, just in the, 11 years now I've been in the community, I've seen so many tweaks and shifts and changes. And I'm always curious, like, why and what are they learning and what is improving from this? And I feel like some sort of log of that for those who are tinkering with the structures, again, not to give you guys any more work, and it'd be so helpful because I just see how much more streamlined and effective you guys are now. So, you know.
Yeah, well, we've still got some things that we need to attend to, but you know, but then, you know, it's as I said, it's a constant process of asking the question, like, is this still simple?
Right.
And is it still being of service? And you got to ask that question every single day, and every individual has to ask that question of their role, because no one knows better than you. If you're a, you know, cog in a machine somewhere in a business, and that's a nasty way of saying it, but if you are kind of valued part of a synarchy, but your little area is kind of becoming uncomfortable, then you need to kind of take full responsibility for that and go, well, I need to first of all think how, you know, what is it, instead of like, this isn't working, it's like, what can I do? What needs to happen here? What do I need in order to find a kind of more peaceful rhythm again? And then you can like bring that feedback to the whole, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But so it's up to each individual in a way to kind of shape their own role, rather than looking to the hierarchy, like, you know, this isn't working, I need more money, or I need more help, or I need, you know, it's like that, which might be an answer, but it's like, what is, you have to really contemplate, like, how can I shape this role? Or maybe it's not the right role as well. So I either change the role, or I reshape it, or I jump out of it and go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think because we're in hierarchy so much as like bottom lines, profits, results. It feels like in this stage of heterarchy, it's process and what are the tweaks. So when one individual takes that self-responsibility, makes those adjustments, I'm guessing it's going to be helpful for the whole to know about it, right? Because then we can all learn from that. So yeah, I think that transparency in process for those of us brave enough to delve into this unknown will be so helpful and supportive, you know, even when we're not working on the same projects or aims or companies or whatnot. It's just, you know, I've learned so much from this, just telling me about these small adjustments and just even the questions. Is it simple? Is it serving? You know, just these baseline things are just so helpful.
Yeah, good. Well, I'd love to hear how your experiment goes as well.
I'll keep you posted.
And I will definitely take that in as a, you know, that's a really great idea. I'll think about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for your time and wisdom. It's always such a pleasure to drop in with you. Yeah,
such a pleasure, Danny. I hope you find that helpful and inspiring, and feel free to share any of that. And I'll kind of I'll share this out at some point as well. So
okay, fantastic.
Yeah, people can hear.
Thanks, Richard.
Cool. We'll let it go there. So that was really fun. Super fun. Yeah. Yeah, that was chock full. I didn't realize that I love how the lines relate to the different processes. It's such I mean, it helps with the processes, but also helps with the ever unfolding understanding of the lines and how they're operating. Yeah. No, there was a lot. There was a lot in there. It's nice to weave it all together, actually, because there's lots of little different bits, but when you bring them all together, they kind of begin to form a bit of a vision.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm excited about this new Delta experiment. Is it already in the works?
It's been planned for a while, and I think you know, I'll ask Pia about it. I know that she has a kind of, she wants to get it going and experiment with it. It's going to be an experiment.
Yeah.
We don't know whether it'll work or not, but yeah, you'll hear about it.
Cool. It sounds exciting. I'm so excited for the pearl. Finally, yay!
I know, I am too, actually, and I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna be on the beating the drum for a few months, like just letting people know these, you know, the same things. This will be a really nice preparation, actually. So we can share this as part of, you know, might take little chunks of this, or I don't know, I'll give it to the guys and they'll see what they think of it. But thank you for asking these fantastic questions.
Thank you for letting me, for being open.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's so great to see you, Richard.
Yeah, love you, Danny. Just,
love you too.
You know, yeah, take care.